What is UV mapping? Well, whatever 3D object you create is going to look good only as long as it is textured. The realism and details can't be achieved just through creating a polygon model. You need the textures. And to create those textures, you need to first create something called a UV map of your object. A UV map is the flat 2D representation of the surface of a 3D model. The process of creating a UV map is called UV unwrapping. Now, there is no such thing as a 3D texture, so this is why they're always based on a 2D image. UV mapping is the process of unwrapping the surface of a 3D model to create that 2D image onto which the model's texture can be painted, and then applying a texture to this 2D representation, which is then wrapped back onto the 3D object. This may seem like a confusing idea at first, but it's actually really very simple. If you've ever made a cube out of a piece of paper, you have done the same process, only in reverse. So if I wanted to make this cube out of paper, I would cut out the shape of a cross. It would be a completely flattened surface. I would then fold it along the seams like so and tape it into this 3D object. UV mapping is exactly that, but in reverse. It's taking the 3D object, unfolding all of the sides, and flattening it out into onto a 2D surface. To texture it, you would then just draw on your textures. You would then fold it back up like so and turn it back into a 3D object. Let me demonstrate. I have here an untextured basic cube. I don't want to just leave it like this. I want to give it a texture. I want to turn it into a Minecraft grass block. So, what do I do first? Well, firstly, I need to unwrap my cube and make my UV map. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to go up to my workspace here and I'm going to change it to UV editing. As you can see, that opened up my UV editor. And if I was to hold right mouse button, click UV shell, here is the unwrapped 3D model. Now, Maya did it very, very well. That's because a cube is a very basic shape and it doesn't take a lot for the computer to make the 2D representation and make it look very nice and clean. So in this case, I don't need to edit the UV map. It was automatic. But when it comes to much more complex models like we're going to be creating in this class, it's not going to be this clean and precise automatically. We are going to have to edit the UV map ourselves, which we'll get into in our project. So I have here the UV map that Maya created out of my cube, the UV map being the 2D representation of my 3D model. It's important to take note that the coordinates of a 2D space is different from the coordinates of a 3D space. Whereas in a 3D space, you have the z-axis, the x-axis, and the y-axis. In a 2D space, you have your horizontal axis, which is called the u-axis, and you have the vertical axis, which is called the V for vertical, hence the name UV. So in my 2D space, we are working with the U and the V axes. Now you can see that when I move around my UV map, it is affecting my 3D object. That's because it's showing you which side belongs to which side, and it helps you to understand that this is the same as this. This is just a flattened 2D representation of my 3D object. So if I scale this down and rotate it, I'm going to hold J just so that it does it in increments. I have my UV map here. Now, how do I apply the textures to this UV map? The first thing I need to do is I need to come up to, and let me just center this a little bit more, my UV snapshot right here. Now, what does that do? Well, it's going to export this UV map as a JPEG. I can then take that JPEG into a 2D software like Photoshop, and I could paint on my texture, whatever I want it to be. If I just wanted to give it colored sides, I could paint this side blue, this side green, yellow, pink, red, whatever. So first thing, let's export this. I'm going to click my UV snapshot. I'm going to make sure that this is saved inside of my project folder, in this case named example UVs, and I'm going to save it inside of my images folder. So I already have one saved here, but I'm going to save this one as well. I'm going to name it UV out, UVs out. And then I'm going to hit apply and close. I want to make sure that my image format is a JPEG because I'm going to be working with a JPEG. I'm going to apply and close. So I just exported my UV map out as a JPEG. I'm now going to take that JPEG to Photoshop and I'm going to apply the textures. All right, I am now in Photoshop and I'm going to open up the UV map that I just exported. I'm going to go to open and I'm going to go to desktop, Mat 136. There's my project folder. And if you remember, we just exported that image, that UV map image out into the images folder. So I'm going to open this up and we named it UVs out. Here's that file right here. And I'm going to open this. Let's give it a moment to load up. There we go. So this is what it looks like once it's been exported. You can still see that here is where the UV map itself is. If I wanted to, I could just hand draw myself the textures. I could do a smiley face, an X, a heart. I could color these in fully. There's a lot of things you can do. It's completely up to you what your texture is going to look like. In this case, I wanted it to look like the Minecraft grass block. Well, I could hand draw this myself directly onto my UV map, but for the sake of simplicity, I am going to use a image that I found. Let me open this. And I already stuck it inside my source images folder. So if I open this up, I have this image right here. Now, this is a Minecraft grass block that has been essentially unwrapped and is now a flattened surface. So what I can do is I can go and I can just copy this, come to where my UV map is, and paste it. Now I do want to line this up. So I'm going to scale this like so. And I'm going to make sure that it's lined up as much as I can with the UV map itself. So I'm going to lower my opacity and let's take a look. You can see it's hanging a little bit over where my UV map ends, but that's okay because it's not going to be visible. Anything outside of my UV map is not going to be visible on my 3D object. Everything inside of the UV map will be visible. So this looks good. I have a texture that has been layered on top of my UV map. I'm going to, well, first I'm going to turn the opacity back up to 100%. And I'm going to save this as a JPEG. Let's actually just do that from export, export as. JPEG. And I'm going to make sure that it is exported out inside of my source images file. Remember, everything saved in your source images are going to be images you bring into Maya. So I'm going to name this UVs done. I'm going to hit save. All right, so I'm finished here in Photoshop. It was really easy because I just used an image instead of painting it myself. I'm now going to go back to Maya and I'm going to apply the UV map to my 3D object by wrapping my 3D object with the UV map. Okay, back in Maya, we don't need to have the UV editor open anymore because we have already made our UV map. So I'm going to set my workspace back to general. Now I have my untextured cube right here. Let's apply that texture that we just created in Photoshop. I'm going to open up my Hypershade right up here. And Hypershade is just the shading network in Maya. Now, I'm not going to go too in detail on that because next week is really when we're going to focus on creating shaders for our models. Make that visible right there. But I'm just going to show you right now how we are going to apply the texture. Well, first things first, I'm going to make sure that my cube is selected. And I'm going to create a shader. So I'm going to go to the Maya tab right over here, and I'm going to create let's see, I would like to create a Lambert. I'm going to go to Surface. Let's go to Favorites, actually. Favorites, Maya, here's the Lambert. Lambert is just the most basic type of shader you can create in Maya. Don't worry, don't panic about how crazy this looks. We are going to go in detail next week. All that you do need to be aware of is that I just created a new shader right up here. It's a Lambert. And I'm going to rename this to Cube. Let's name it Minecraft. If I can spell Cube. So right up here, I renamed my shader. And I don't have the image attached to it yet. Right now, it's just a basic shader with this kind of bland gray color. So at the color properties right here, I'm going to go to this checkered little icon right here. That checkered icon is where I'm able to upload the file we just created in Photoshop. So I'm going to click it. And I'm going to bring out my little window that just popped up. And I can go down to File. File is where I can upload that image. So you can see it now opened up File Attributes, Image Name. I can find that image we just created by clicking the folder icon. And if you remember correctly, we just named it UVs Done. There's the file we created in Photoshop. I'm going to open it. So you can see now that the shader is no longer that gray color. Now it is simply the image that we created. If I was to click my cube off in my viewport, right click on my shader that we just made, I can select Assign Material to Selection. Now watch what happens. Well, it looks like I can't see it. That's okay. That just means I don't have my shading turned on. So I am going to go to Textured right here. If I toggle this on, my texture will be visible. There we go. Let me just rotate this. I'm going to hold J once again to do this in increments. And there's my cube. And it looks nice and clean. There's a little bit of excess black right along the edge right here, which just means that in Photoshop, I wasn't very careful with lining up my UV map with my texture. This one as well. But if I really wanted to clean it up, I could just go back to Photoshop and redo that JPEG that I made and bring it back and just reapply it. But here you are. Here is my textured cube that I created. So what did we do? Well, we first opened up the UV editor and we unwrapped our 3D object. We created a 2D UV map. We then took that UV map into Photoshop where we applied the texture. We exported that image and we brought it back to Maya where we connected it to a shader and applied it back to our 3D object. So that is how you texture in Maya, by UV mapping, UV unwrapping, and UV mapping it again. We'll get further into it in our project.